We're on page 128. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. You should know that no one has adorned himself with anything as beautiful as the intellect. No one has worn a garment more beautiful than knowledge. This is so because God is only known through the intellect and He is only obeyed with knowledge. Know that the Gnostics established the principles of insight into the soul states upon the witness of knowledge through God and a sound understanding of the divine law. Will you not consider the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ? Whoever acts on the basis of his knowledge, God will bequeath unto him knowledge that he does not know. The sign of this is that additional knowledge leads to greater fear and greater adherence to the prophetic example. Whenever its possessor increases in knowledge, he increases in fear. And each time he increases in action, he increases in humility.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala min at-ta'allum wa at-ta'lim wa nafa' al-intifa' wa at-tadhakkur wa at-tadhkir wa al-ifada wa al-istifada wa al-hath ala at-tamassuk bi kitabillah wa sunnati rasulih sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ad-du'a ila al-huda wa ad-dalal ala al-khair ibtigha' wajhihi ta'ala wa marratihi wa qurbi thawbi subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alhamdulillah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us to reach these last 10 days of this blessed month, and that the 10 days fluctuate depending upon whether the month is 29 or 30 days. If the month is 30 days, then that the last 10 days enter from the night of the 21st. If the month is 29 days, however, it enters from the night of the 20th. So you have 10, 10, and 10, Asham Hawacha, or those last 10. This is a very special time. And that at this point, that even though there might have been other things that we were doing in the previous 20 days of Ramadan, is that we should do our very best to focus and to try to rid ourselves of anything that is going to prevent us from dedicating our time in getting close to Allah Ta'ala, devoting ourselves to Him, and that trying to free ourselves up to really benefit from this ever most special time. And that especially in this time that we need to take heed to the words of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that from a good person's Islam, a great manifestation of their true Islam, their true submission to the Lord, is they're leaving that which doesn't concern them. And so especially in these last 10 days, is that which doesn't concern us, that we should do our very best to leave it aside, that there's plenty of time to fulfill it at a later time. And there's certain things that certain things that you won't be asked about Yawm al-Qiyamah, so it doesn't harm you to not know. If you never figure out how to use an iPad, it's not really a big deal. You're not going to be asked about that. Why didn't you learn how to operate an iPad? So there's certain things that don't matter whether you know them or not. And that there are other things that truly matter about whether we know them or not. And that when the sign is that there's what's called Thompson Basira, is that someone's inner sight has become extinguished. You find them making a big deal out of things that really are of no consequence, but they have no focus on things that are really of consequence. And that this is why that from the etiquettes of argumentation is that if you see someone that arguing over a worldly thing, that the etiquette is not even to, actually if someone's speaking and in an argument, or whether it's in a conversation, and unless there's a need to do so, if it's a mistake in something worldly, that it's because it's a worldly thing, it's just left. Whereas normally people you see, as soon as they know anything about anything, that they're quick to speak about what they know about, so forth. Now if it's in the deen and that it's of consequence and there's a need to clarify, then someone should clarify. There's a beautiful story of one of the teachers of my teachers, Ibrahim bin Umar bin Aqil, who was a very righteous man and a great muhaddith. Our main asanid and hadith go back through Ibrahim bin Umar bin Aqil, and that there was someone had stolen some land from him, and that he had brought the papers to prove that he actually owned this piece of land. And that his teacher was someone by the name of Habib Abdullah bin Umar al-Shatri, was one of the great teachers of the Ribat Talim in Hadramaut in Tarim, and that this Ribat Talim, which was founded in the early 14th century, around 1306, 1305, that they said there was about 13,000 scholars that graduated from this school, and that then spread literally in different places all throughout the world, and that he walked into the presence of this was his teacher, Habib Abdullah bin Umar al-Shatri, and Habib Ibrahim walked into his presence, and that he said that, "Ya Ibrahim," and he knew outwardly didn't know anything about what had transpired. That this is basira, this is inner sight. He says, "Ya Ibrahim," he says, "Man naza'ak," and whoever is going to vie with you for something worldly, فَأَلْقِ الْأَوْرَاقِ فِي نَحْرِهِ, just throw these, just give these papers to them. He says, وَمَنْ نَازَعَكَ فِي دِينِكَ فَنَازِعْهُ, and if people are going to try to question you regarding something related to your deen, clarify about the realities of the deen, meaning that the dunya is not even worth getting involved in arguing with, just give them the piece of land. Now that's obviously a level of ihsan that most people don't see it as such, but that's ihsan, is to reach that particular level. And then you have all these whole series of thoughts that come to people's minds. Wait a second, if we do that, people are just going to take advantage of. Wait a second, if we do that, all of these thoughts will come to people's minds. How we do this in our context, that this is the reason why that we're like this is because people always do this, that our Prophet ﷺ that told us about the reality, and that the Prophet ﷺ was oath by Allah, "Ma naqasa malun min sadaqah," that your wealth is not diminished by charity. And he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the servant will not increase in pardon except they will increase in izz, except they will increase in closeness to Allah Ta'ala in honor. And in honor, meaning that this idea that we think that when we just overlook things or we forgive people and that type of thing, is that they then will take advantage of us. Is that yes, there is an element of that you arrange your affairs outwardly, but the internal reality is, as was mentioned, you only truly increase in honor. So let's move on, inshallah ta'ala. We're moving through this text consistently, and inshallah that we'll be able to finish it by the end of this blessed month. Allah ta'ala bless us all with a husn khatimah. That we've reached the point where he says here, Imam al-Muhasibi rahimahullah, وَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ مَا تَزَيَّنَ أَحَدٌ بِزِينَةٍ كَالْعَقَلِ. You should know that no one has adorned himself with anything as beautiful as the intellect. This is the most beautiful thing of all that someone can adorn themselves with, is the beauty of the intellect. And that the great tabi'i, Sayyidina Urwa ibn Zubair, rahimahullah, that he says that أَفْضَلْ مَا أُعْتِيَ الْعِبَادُ فِي الدُّنْيَا الْعَقْلِ. The greatest thing that the servants can be given in this world is a strong intellect, his intellect. And he said, وَأَفْضَلَ مَا أُعْتُوا فِي الْآخِرَةِ رَضْوَانُ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. And that the greatest thing that they can be given in the next world is the contentment of Allah Ta'ala. وَرِضْوَانُ اللَّهِ أَكْبَرُ. That when it comes just after a description of paradise, that the greatest thing of all that someone can attain is the ridwan, is the contentment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because all of the different pleasures of paradise are in the contentment of Allah ta'ala. Radiallahu anhu wa radu anhu. Now, and then he goes on to say, وَلَا لَبِسَ ثَوْبًا أَجْمَلَ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ, and that he will not, no one has worn a garment more beautiful than knowledge. And these are what we normally think of beauty, what we normally think of as that clothes that someone wears. These are metaphors he's giving us, because most people will judge beauty that by the way that they look outwardly. But what this Imam is saying is that there's another beauty that is even greater, and that's the beauty of the intellect. That this is one of the true determining factors of beauty. And likewise, in terms of someone's clothes, the greatest clothes that someone can wear are the garments of knowledge. This is because God is only known through the intellect. Now, what he means by that, he obviously knew this because he was a great Gnostic as well scholar, is that the intellect can get you to the door. Right? Meaning is that the intellect, yes, that you can attain ma'rifah through the intellect, but a basic level of knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. That reaching that point where someone makes that informed decision where that they're going to become Muslim, or that even if they're raised as a Muslim that they're going to adhere to the teachings of Islam, is that this is the whole goal of the human being, is to learn how to balance the three faculties. These three faculties, one is what is called the quwwat al-aql, the faculty, the rational faculty, which is your intellect. And I'm pointing up here because there's differences of opinion that is the intellect in the heart or is the intellect in the mind. And the way that you could say, just to summarize that, the differences is that the lower aspect of the intellect is in the mind, the higher aspect of the intellect is in the heart. The reality of the intellect is in the heart. And so meaning is that there's an element of intellect that we share even with non-Muslims. The ability to do mathematics, the ability to, just basic, problem solving, this is in the mind. But the higher level of the aql, of the intellect, the true aspect of that is in the heart. And its reality is in light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places therein. And so what he means here then is it's affirming that what we need to affirm in order to come to know our Lord at the basic level. This is why that the whole discussion of ilm al-kalam, that the science of theology, to use a rough translation, is that it relates to the intellect. Why? Because that's the basic beliefs about, we just believe about Allah and His Messenger, that you don't need to get into a detailed discussion about that. But if you want to buttress those beliefs with rational proofs, right, then you need to have a discussion of the intellect, which is a higher level of belief because it solidifies your belief at times. And that this is why that one of the other words for ilm al-kalam and aqidah relates to an aqid, which is a knot. In that sense, it's a kind of knot on what you believe. And that the dominant opinion of the Ash'ari theologians, at least, is that it is a requirement for those that have the ability to buttress their faith with rational proofs to do so. And that they say in this regard that no one can be a muqallid, as in you can't follow qualified scholarship in this case, that if you have those abilities. And that this was actually very challenging because oftentimes is that we aren't too strong in the rational sciences. Most people don't grow up studying logic. Most people don't grow up really understanding the categories of the intellect. And so I remember first studying the chapter of Aqidah from the Method Ibn Ashra, Sayyid Abdul Wahid Ibn Ashra, which essentially is a versified version of the Imam Sanusi's Ibrahim. And it's very difficult at first. That when people tell you that the rational judgment has three different categories, that impossibility, possibility, and necessary. And then someone might ask, well, why are those the only three possibilities? And the proofs of which are self-evident. It's because there is no other possibilities. But it's hard to grasp that at first, and then to understand how they applied that and what our theologians did, which was brilliant. And that part of the reason is that even though there were some scholars that were against this, even early on, we mentioned to you earlier, we were talking about Imam Qasabi, that his debates, not debates, but his the position of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal in relation to him, and that you have those that incline to more type of athari, type of aqidah, where that we, when we talk about belief, that we just relate belief to what we believe, and not get into the details and clarify that how that is understood with rational proofs, and that the other side of that discussion is that what was so brilliant about our theologians is that they developed a way to articulate our beliefs that doesn't require someone to believe in the Quran or Sunnah, right? Meaning that if I'm going to speak to a Jew or a Christian or an atheist or an agnostic or that someone from another faith or background or whatever it might be, in that if I quote them the Quran, they might not, for them the Quran, they might not believe in the Quran. So how can I articulate my beliefs in a way that they can understand? The beautiful thing is that everyone has an aql. Everyone has an intellect. Right? Meaning that if you develop a way of articulation that is based upon principles of intellect that are common to all of humanity, you've now entered into a platform now where that you've created you've now leveled the playing field so people can understand what it is that you believe. Now, whether they come to believe or not, that's not in our hands. But at least now that you've articulated them. Anyhow, what he means here is this level of intellect that either causes you to lead to that decision to understand the truth of the existence of God and the prophecy of His prophets, and then, or that if someone was raised in that in terms of adhering to those teachings that they've been raised with. As for the higher levels of knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's not done with the intellect. Okay? Because it is the qalb, it is the heart, it is the place of gratitude. The heart is the locus, if you will. Right? Meaning it's the place of gratitude. That's how we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is with our heart. Just as we know we love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with our ruh. And just as that there is something even more subtle than the ruh, which is known as the seal. يَعْلَمُ السِّرَّ وَأَخْفَى, as some of them indicate as a proof to its existence, even though that sir can have different meanings. One possible allusion in this verse is to what we have within us, which is called the sir. And this is the mahal of mushahada. This is the place in which the human being, that we witness Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And all of this exists within us. And now whether we unlock that capacity or potentiality or not is something else. And this relates to the essence of the human affair. Is that every single one of us has a ruh, every single son of Adam, every single child of Adam has a spirit. And Allah Ta'ala addressed our spirits, all of us, the day of Alastu bi Rabbikum. And then as we enter here into this world, and our spirits became lodged between our physical bodies, which that physical bodies made out of earth naturally is that they have a thickness to them in that sense, a kadafa, that at first appears to be that opposite to the latafa, the ethereal nature of the spirit. And that this is the whole reason why Allah Ta'ala sent prophets, is that they are calling us to something that already exists from within us. And this is why when our Prophet ﷺ said that إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. And we've all heard the hadith. But why did our Prophet ﷺ say that I've only been sent to complete? تَمَّمَا يُتَمِّمُ is to complete. If something's tam, it's complete. Why did he say complete? Right? There's different opinions about that. One, because he came in a long legacy of prophets who all made their contributions. But one of the other understandings of this hadith is that we are in of ourselves, because of our fitrah, naturally to dispose to everything our Prophet is teaching us. So when he said to complete, it already exists within us. It's just through the blessing of that prophetic teaching that it's bringing that to the surface. And that the true efficacy of those virtues we will find in our lives. Meaning is that someone, even a non-Muslim, could have good character. But it's one thing to have good character. There's an objective criterion for good character, yes, but there's another thing to have that good character trait lead to a veil be removed between you and your Lord. Be a means for you to have a heart that is enlightened, be a means for you to attain reward from Allah Ta'ala. That's a whole different thing. And the Prophet ﷺ came to complete these. Or that if we have a particular virtue of generosity, say, is that someone could have generosity and that they might be generous in giving things that are haram. I'm talking about if they before Islam, for instance. But then through prophetic guidance, is that they can take that trait that they had of generosity, but situate it in a way that it's going to then be in a religious context now, in a prophetic context, and it would be a means for them to seek the full fruit and benefit of it. And so that this is what he means here by this level of the intellect. As for the higher levels of ma'rifah, which this is what they point to here, is that these books are books of amal, the books of action. When you implement them, when you act upon them, they will lead, hopefully, that even though it might take a long time, to an unveiling of the heart. And that this is the higher form of knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to us in the Quran, that He refers to in the Quran, that He taught Sayyidina Khidr, وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ مِنْ لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا, that we taught him knowledge that from our presence. We taught him knowledge from our presence. These are what are known as the ulum al-ladunniya, which are the only knowledges that are sought for in and of themselves. The reason that we study every other type of knowledge is ultimately to expose ourselves to this type of knowledge, and that this is the most beneficial knowledge, it's the highest of knowledge, and that there's nothing greater than this. Now, this is not prophecy. Prophecy is for the prophets, but this is the essence of the prophetic legacy, and that they came to leave behind for us then to have a portion of. There are these experiential knowledges, and that there's an indication to them in the number of hadith. There's a hadith in Sahih Muslim. It's a long hadith, so we will paraphrase. It's a hadith with Sayyidina Ubay ibn Ka'ab, who is one of the greatest of all of the Sahaba who recited the Quran. And the hadith is in the context of the Ahruf al-Sab'a, the 7 modes of recitation, which is a long discussion in of itself. But in this hadith, Ubay that met with 2 other companions, and both of them recited the Quran in a slightly different way, other than the way that he had learned. And so that he said, فَأَنْكَرْتُهُمْ, I found trouble. I was troubled by these 2 different. I didn't think that they were correct. These 2 different messages. So he said he took him to the Prophet ﷺ, and that he told the Prophet what had happened, and the Prophet had both of them recite. فَحَسَّنَهُمَا, the Prophet said both of the recitations were good. And then Ubay says, this is in Sahih Muslim, he says that then that doubt entered into my heart, as if it was from the time of Jahiliyyah, of the pre-Islamic periods. This is one of the greatest companions. He's like, how could that this recitation be correct, and this recitation also be correct? But the shahid that I'm trying to get at here is that the hadith says, فَلَمَّا رَأَى رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ مَا غَشِيَنِي, when the Prophet ﷺ saw what overcame me, قال فَضَرَبَنِي فِي صَدْرِي, the Prophet hit me in the chest. فَفِضْتُ عَرَقًا, I started to profusely sweat. فَكَأَنِّي أَنْظُرُ إِلَى اللَّهِ فَرَقًا, that's the nas of the hadith. He said, as if I was looking at Allah clear as daybreak. That's that you can, if you don't believe me, look it up in Sahih Muslim. That's the hadith. Now the Arabs say that أَبْيَنُ مِنْ فَرَقَ الصُّبْحِ. Faraq and falaq have similar meanings, even linguistically. Fa, lam, qaf, fa, ra, qaf. That they say, أَبْيَنُ, if you look at Ibn Manzur's Lisan al-Arab, the Arabs say that something is أَبْيَنُ مِنْ فَرَقَ الصُّبْحِ. What we'd say in English, clearer than daybreak. We use that as well. Clearer than daybreak. Why? Because daybreak, when you are in, at least in a city without city lights, and you see dawn enter, it's just crystal clear in the horizon. It spreads like a bird's wings from east to west. And that this is exactly how you translate that. فَكَأَنِّ, he used the kaf tashbih, which is a very precise way that the ulama go into great detail. Why the kaf tashbih? That's its own topic in itself. But كأني, as if I was looking upon Allah, faraqan, clear as daybreak. Meaning that there was a veil lifted in his heart in that moment. Right? Because your physical eye, you can't see Allah with your physical eye. Because Allah Ta'ala doesn't exist in the time-space continuum. But you can see the divine impact on creation with your heart. Your heart can know your Lord. And that this higher level of ma'rifah, which these knowledges point to. They point to it. They point to it. And sometimes that we hear people talk about these things, but come on now, give me some proofs that these type of knowledges really exist. And we could talk for a long period of time about the proofs. the hadith that we've all heard, about the hadith of where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, is that my servants will draw near to me, with nothing better than that which I have made an obligation upon them, and they will continually draw near to me with supererogatory acts that entail that I love them. Hatta uhibbah, until I love them. فَإِذَا أَحْبَبْتُهُ, and then when I love them, what comes after that? كُنْتُ سَمْعَهُ الَّذِي يَسْمَعُ بِهِ, I will be the hearing through which he hears. That is exactly what the hadith says. What does that mean? For Allah to be the hearing through which you hear? Does it mean that he enters into your physical body and he's astaghfirullah? That's not what it means at all. Right? This is from the Mutashabihat, like there's verses that are from the Mutashabihat. You deny completely the anthropomorphic meaning. As for the murad of Allah, what Allah means by that in His divine saying, that Allah Ta'ala Alam. Right now, you could make ta'wil and give a figurative interpretation that this is indication of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala closest to Him, the servant. But that the point here is that what kind of servant is this? This is obviously something that is not a normal state. His eyes, the seeing through which he sees, the hand through which he sees, the foot through which he walks. And then what? If he asks me, I will give him. If he seeks refuge with me, I will give that person refuge. And what kind of servant is this? They're mustajab al-du'a. They ask Allah Ta'ala for something that they're given it. And that these things exist. And so I remember one time I was in Northern Virginia at a mosque, and I quoted this hadith. We were waiting for Shaykh Abdul Hakim Marad, who was visiting, and his flight was delayed. And I quoted this hadith, and there was a sister after the session that said, brother, you need to be very careful the way you translate the hadith and so forth. And probably you're right, we do need to be careful the way we translate hadith. But I think she was troubled by the way I translated it. But there's how else are you going to translate it? Kuntu sam'ahu alladhi yasma'u bihi. How else are you going to translate that? Yani, I am, even though kuntu is ism kana and it's in the maldi, right? You're not going to translate I was. It literally says kuntu, I was the sam', I was the hearing through which. But the meaning obviously is in the present. So I am the hearing, but still I was or am, that still doesn't change the context really. The hearing through which yasma'u bihi. And be through, and yasma' here. There's no other way to translate it. So then, that she actually left. We were saying that she left. I think she didn't like whatever I said. And then we were waiting for Shaykh Abdul Hakim Marad. Then he came. SubhanAllah. It was Ayib. He didn't know what transpired. Right? We got there, and he started talking about his subject, and then he quoted the same hadith. And right before he started to quote the hadith, he paused. He says that, now, if there's any literalists here, that you better get up and leave before I translate this hadith. And he did not know what had happened at all. And then he translated the hadith exactly the way I translated the hadith. I was like, subhanAllah. Yeah, these type of things. Allah Akbar. Anyhow, that وَلَا أُطِيعَ إِلَّا بِالْعِلْمِ. Why is the intellect and knowledge so possible? Is that He is only obeyed with knowledge. Allah is obeyed with knowledge. Is that even if that you want to obey Allah Ta'ala, that you have to have knowledge to obey Allah Ta'ala. غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. The two archetypes of going astray. Yes, Jews, Christians, but deeper than that, the tendencies. Is that to know and then have your lower self overcome you such that you go astray. That will lead to the ghadab of Allah Ta'ala and His wrath. Right? But it's just to go astray through a lack of knowledge. The archetype of which we have is the Christians. Right? That this is that the way people go astray is that they might be well intentioned. They might want good. But without knowledge that there's no way to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That knowledge is central. In our deen, and that knowledge. Franz Rosenthal has a book called Knowledge Triumphant, and that although that yes, knowledge is central in our deen, that actually the fruit of that knowledge is actually the higher thing, which is love, because you can't have love without knowledge. But generally, that's a correct statement to say that knowledge is simple. And that if you look at the intellectual heritage of the scholars and forebears that came before us, it is the most amazing intellectual contribution in human history. It is unbelievable, and that literally, like, just the books that we have access to, is that if you would put every printed book in one area, and just so you could see the number of works that have been printed alone, the number of books that have been printed are actually just a fraction of the books that exist still to this day in manuscript form. And the books that we still have in manuscript form, compared to the books that were lost over the centuries, that for one reason or another are just a fraction of the books that we have an incredible intellectual heritage and legacy, that you could spend your whole life in just one of the sciences and just somewhat come to know some of its depths. And that knowledge is, that's why in the end, as Imam Ghazali said, is that the true scholar is the scholar that realizes how little that he knows, how little he actually really knows. And that's the end, actually, result of the scholar, that they realize, after everything that they know, how little that they really know, which is it's a very humbling experience. That there's a quote here by Sayyidina Mu'adh bin Jabal about the greatness of knowledge, Shaykh Abdul Fattah Muhammad mentions here. He says, قال معاذ بن جبل رضي الله عنه العلم حياة القلوب من الجهل. That knowledge is the life of the hearts from ignorance. ومصباح الأبصار من الظلمة. And the lamp of the eyes from darkness. وقوة الأبدان من الضعف. And the strength of the body, of the physical bodies, of weakness. يبلغ بالعبد منازل الأخيار والأبرار. Through it, that a servant will achieve the high degrees of the righteous. وَالدَّرَجَاتِ الْعُلَى فِي الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ. And the greatest ranks in this world and the next. وَالتَّفَكُّرُ فِي يَعْدِلُ الصِّيَامِ. Just using your intellect, reflecting upon it, is like it has the same reward as fasting. وَمُذَاكَرَتُهُ تَعْدِلُ الْقِيَامِ. That reviewing, speaking about it with other people, that it's as if they're standing in prayer. وَبِهِ تُوصُلُ الْأَرْحَامِ. Through this knowledge is that you even find that family relations are kept. وَيُعْرَفَ الْحَلَالِ مِنَ الْحَرَامِ. And the halal is known, it's distinguished from the haram. And keep in mind that our Prophet said about Sayyidina Mu'adh, is that أَعْلَمُ أُمَّتِي بِالْحَلَالِ وَالْحَرَامِ Mu'adh bin Jabal. That the most knowledgeable of my ummah of the halal and the haram is Mu'adh bin Jabal. وَهُوَ إِمَامٌ وَالْعَمَلُ تَابِعُهُ. Is that the knowledge is the imam, and action is its follower. وَيُلْهَمُهُ السُّعَدَاء. Is that the felicitous are inspired, they're granted the inspiration of this knowledge. وَيُحْرَمُهُ الْأَشْقِيَاء. And that those that are doomed to perdition are veiled from it, they're prevented from it. And that La ilaha illallah Rasulullah. MashaAllah. طيب. Let's see if there's anything else we have to mention here. So then he says that وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ أَهْلَ الْمَعْرِفَةِ بِاللَّهِ بَنَوْا أُصُولَ الْأَحْوَالِ عَلَى الشَّاهِدِ الْعِلْمِ بِاللَّهِ وَتَفَقُّهُ فِي الْفُرُوعِ. Know that the Gnostics established the principles insight into the soul states upon the witness of knowledge through God and a sound understanding of the divine law. Do not see the words of our Prophet ﷺ, whoever acts on the basis of his knowledge, God will bequeath unto him knowledge that he knows not. And this hadith is related by Abu Nu'aym in the Hilya, and that Shaykh Abdul Fattah has a tahqiq of this hadith, where he says that it's really originating from the words of Jesus, the son of Mary, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. But is that really a hadith or not? Allah ta'ala knows best. But without doubt that even if it's not a hadith, the meaning is sound. That whoever acts upon that which they know, Allah ta'ala will bequeath that person knowledge that they don't know. And that's mujarrab, and it's found to be true. وعلامة ذلك فهم تزايد العلم بالإشفاق. The sign of this is that additional knowledge leads to greater fear and greater adherence to the prophetic example. That this is one of the signs of true knowledge, if it leads to that greater fear of Allah Ta'ala. Ishfaq here, yes, shafaqa does have that meaning, but it also means that fear. And that it should lead to greater states of fear. And some might say, well, why would it lead to greater states of fear? Well, the fact of the matter is that if we do not have fear of Allah, we don't know Allah. This is what our scholars tell us. It's because the more that we come to recognize the majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more reverential fear that we will have. Just the awesomeness of our Creator subhanahu wa ta'ala, the grandeur and the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The more that we come to really realize that, that just as anything in this dunya, because that when you see something just unbelievable, that you're just awestruck by that thing. This reverential, type of awe. Likewise, that with our Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala, we realize that what we're really talking about here, the Lord of the heavens and earth subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, who's so apparent that He's hidden subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's one of the great aspects of knowing Allah Ta'ala. It's so apparent that He's hidden subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that we should also increase them in that humility. And as we mentioned before, is that the more we increase in knowledge, we should increase in mercy and in humility. If we are not increasing in mercy and in humility, there's something wrong with our seeking of knowledge, or there's something wrong with the teachers who are teaching us. Because it means that maybe they don't have a sanad, maybe they don't have a direct connection back to the Prophet ﷺ. We should increase in humility. And there's one story that we heard from our teachers about the great Shaykh of Egypt, rahimahullah, that he gave a speech one time, and a number of people attended, a lot of people attended, and that on the way home, that he told his son who was driving that he had used the restroom. So they stopped, and it took a long time. And his son was wondering what had happened. And he walks into the latrines, and he sees his father, Shaykh al-Sha'awi, as famous as he was in Egypt, and he was cleaning the latrines. And he was like, Father, what are you doing? Right? And he said that after I gave that last speech, he said that it was just a thought that came to my heart that I wanted to completely eradicate. So I wanted to show myself my true nature and come clean these latrines. That's the true nature of all the people of Allah. That they are in a state of humility. They think that everyone is better than them. And they see themselves as a khadim, as a servant of the people. But, okay. So go ahead.
The foundation that led to strength in their path is consistency in commanding the good and forbidding the wrong, with honesty, truthfulness, prioritizing knowledge over the desire of their souls, and finding sufficiency with God from all of His creation.
والأصل الذي ثبتوا به في طريق التزام الأمر بالمعروف والنهي عن المنكر بالصدق والتقديم للمعروف وحدود النفوس والاختلاف بالحق. الله أكبر. Right, consistency and thabat, steadfastness upon their way, and that this is the sign of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that what they do and what they're talking about now, in 10 years from now, and 20 years from now, it's the same. That's what you find, is that they haven't gone here, switched here, it's the same thing. It's the same discourse. The same people there with them in the beginning are the same people that are there with them now. And that there's, yes, taraki, and they're rising in degrees, but it's the same discourse. And that this is thabat. And one of the great examples of that in our time is the great scholar of Sham, Sheikh Muhammad Sa'id al-Madan al-Bhuti, rahimahullah ta'ala, who took positions that made him very unpopular towards the end of his life in Syria. But this was a testimony to his utter sincerity with his Lord. His entire career, he's one of the most famous scholars alive, is that he knew his position was unpopular, and he kept to his position. And even people that were close to him burned his books, and he became extremely unpopular, to the point where that you even mention him among Syrians even nowadays, and that they go crazy and will start cursing him and insulting him and so forth, to the point where you have to just leave the message because you don't want to hear that. And that despite that, though, he stuck to his position. In his gathering, when Abd al-Faqir was a short time in Sham that he used to attend, he used to have a class on Mondays in Riyadh al-Salihin, a class on Thursdays in the Hikmah min al-Ta'ila, and that thousands of people, the masjid would be full. That towards the end of his life, there was a few hundred. And that despite that he was right. He didn't care whether people were there or people were not. This is his position. That for what he believed true before his Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has to meet his Lord sticking to what he believes to be true. Steadfastness. He was teaching Hussein classes for 40 years. 40 years. Mondays and Thursdays for 40 years. Consistently. Almost never stopping except if he traveled. For 40 years. To the point where a suicide bomber came, blew himself up, and he was martyred. Rahimahullah ta'ala. And attained in his being martyred that he was teaching a class and holding on to a mushaf, giving tafsir of the Quran, and that blood came onto his mushaf, like that of Sayyidina Uthman bin Affan. And he was killed in the masjid, like Sayyidina Umar bin al-Khattab, and killed by a Muslim, like Sayyidina Ali bin Abi Talib. That's why my teacher said about this, that he attained many types of inheritances of the early people from who he was, and that he was a great imam. And then after all that, he's buried right next to Sayyidina Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. Allahu Akbar. And this is, subhanAllah. Even some of the people that questioned him after this happened, that they started to, when they saw it, martyrdom right before their eyes, and there's videos of it, sad. And there's videos of the raw footage. And don't watch it. It's not, I wouldn't watch it. But subhanAllah, on TV, it was being filmed. It was on TV. And a man who I became Muslim with, his brother was in the majlis. And also like 40, 50 of the Shaykh's students died with him. But subhanAllah, mashallah. His firmness upon the path, that adhering to commanding the good and forbidding the wrong with sincerity, truthfulness, and prioritizing knowledge over the desires of their soul. Allahu Akbar. تقديم العلم على حدود النفس. Is that our nafs desire, especially in the lower state, in the nafs al-ammara bis-su', it desires all kinds of things. It's not good for us. But we put knowledge over the desires of our soul. And astaghfirullah, Allah ta'ala, forgive us. And may we be people who bring this to life, inshallah ta'ala. What is istighna billah, Allahu Akbar. And jamia khalqih, and finding sufficiency with God from all of His creation. That is not an easy thing to do. How can we attain that in this blessed month of Ramadan, where that we have istighna billah, and that we seek our richness, we seek our sufficiency, that we seek our validation only through our Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Therefore, seek the way of people whose knowledge increased their reverence, whose actions increased their heart vision, and whose intellect increased their gnosis. If lack of the necessary etiquette prevents you from following their way, take pause and rebuke yourself. The attributes of those who are sincere will never be lost to those possessing true knowledge.
So that, again, seek the way of people whose knowledge increased their reverence, whose actions increased their heart vision, whose intellect increased their gnosis. So again, that these are effects that should happen, and that if it is knowledge that is of true benefit. If lack of the necessary etiquette prevents you from following their way, take pause and rebuke yourself. Inshallah. The attributes of those who are sincere will never be lost to those possessing true knowledge. Right? So that lack of proper adab could veil, and that's why it's so important that adab always has to accompany Islamic learning. You could go to the university and no one cares. You can wear what you want, do what you want, act like you want, be as rude as you want, right? And still get a diploma at the end. But in true Islamic studies, he said that's impossible. You cannot truly learn, and you cannot truly graduate in that sense and get licensed unless that you are a person of adab, and that you are a person at least attempting outwardly to follow the comportment that goes along with sacred knowledge. Okay.
Know that every idea has an associated etiquette, and in every parable there is clear knowledge. Individuals able to discern this truth are those who understand what God desires and are able to harvest the fruits of certainty from His scriptures.
MashaAllah. Before we get to that he mentions a beautiful story here in his tahqiq about Imam Bukhari. And that he says here is that it's narrated by Muhammad ibn Mansur. He said that I was in the gathering of Abi Abdullah, Sayyidi Imam al-Bukhari, a great hadith compiler. He said that, and then someone took some type of qada, which is just some type of something dirty, some type of something that was caught in his beard. He said he took it from his beard and then he threw it on the ground in the masjid. And he said that I was in the garden and I saw Imam Bukhari that he looked at this man who just did this and him throwing it on the ground in the masjid, then he looked at the people. He said that when he noticed there was a time where people weren't looking, that Imam Bukhari grabbed this thing that was in this man's beard and he took it and he put it in his sleeve like this. He said, then I saw that when he went out of the masjid, he said he threw it out, so it would have been left in the masjid. But just the adab of Imam Bukhari. He said that I didn't put any hadith into my collection except before praying 2 rak'ats of istikhara. Every one of the 7,000 plus hadith, he prayed 2 rak'ats of istikhara before placing it in his book. And so that there's wisdoms why these people were. There's reasons why these people were like who they were. So then he says, and this is the last part we'll take for today, that every idea, every fiqh has an adab. It has an associate, every idea, everything that we think about, there is an adab that goes along with that. وَفِي كُلِّ إِشَارَةٍ عِلْمًا. And in every parable, there is clear knowledge. وَإِنَّمَا يُمَيِّزُ ذَلِكَ مَنْ فَهِمَ عَنِ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ مُرَادَهُ. And the individuals who are able to discern the truth are those who understand what God desires and are able to harvest the fruits of certainty from His scriptures. MashaAllah. I think that's a good stopping place. There's a couple of questions here. What advice might you give to those that do not always have access to sound scholars when seeking knowledge? And what foundational texts do you recommend? I would recommend that, first of all, one benefit from their local situation to the extent possible. So most likely that in many places in the United States that there are some people that we can benefit from locally, even if it be just in the Arabic language. So I would try to find somehow someone locally to help one continue learning, number one. If that's not available, then I would start a study circle. And you choose a few books that, even if someone doesn't have the ability to comment on, you just read them amongst yourselves without commentary. And that's in case there is no one at all local. Number two, I would recommend that taking an online class. The online classes are a band-aid until we have thousands of local teachers, inshallah. There was a time and Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, all throughout the Arabian Peninsula, Turkey, Syria, Egypt, everywhere else, is that they didn't have a lot of scholars either. But they worked hard and they created institutions that built scholars to the point where there's hundreds, sometimes thousands of scholars in one locale. So that our situation that we're in here in the United States is not unknown historically. There was a lot of places that were in the same situation that we're in at a particular juncture in their history. But this is why that it's so important that we have schools. And this is why it's so important that you support the school of Maulana and the Nakhlah and anyone else trying to do things of that nature. This is the most important thing of all. If we really knew the importance of these schools, is that we would know that this is the very best way that we can spend our money. It's the very best investment that we can possibly make, because it's sadaqah jariyah, that you help him build Nakhlah, and that every student that benefits and every student who benefits from that student, every student who benefits from the students who benefit from those students, until Yawm al-Qiyamah, you get a portion of that in your sahifa, in your scroll, right, or any other learning institution. And that these are the most important things of all that we support. And it's unfortunate sometimes you have to just, twist the arms of the community to get them to support these things. And we shouldn't even need fundraisers. There shouldn't even be a fundraiser that needed to be cancelled, because there shouldn't even been a need for a fundraiser. There should have been people that already came forth and yallah, bismillah, right, without having to even be a need for fundraising. Right? This is the most important thing of all. Right? This is as serious as serious could possibly be. I mean, these are this is our lifeline. These type of institutions. Without them, forget everything else. Right? If you cannot educate the next generation, khalas, that in a generation after that, they're probably not going to be Muslim, or they'll just be hanging on by a thread. Right? If we don't have institutions, right? This is it's aib that we even have to ask people to even support these things. These things that people should come, they should be hastening, and if they really knew what was in them, is that they would be fighting with one another, the way they'd be fighting with one another for the Saf al-Awwal, the first row of prayer, that they would be fighting with one another to get an institution like Nakhlah to even accept their dollar. And what it should be is that we have degrees of wara, and we only accept the very best of all the wealth that is given. Because some people give wealth that is questionable. That we should be giving the most purest of our wealth, the best of our wealth, right, to these types of projects. And because that if something's built upon taqwa, it will last. This is why many of the most special mosques in Tarim, for instance, is that they would bring the dirt from places way outside of Tarim where it was totally unquestionable whether it was halal or not. They knew this dirt was 100% halal, nothing mixed with it whatsoever. And they wanted to be fully halal. This is why that when the founder of Al-Azhar, Fatima Fahriya, when she was building, the Qaraween rather, that she fasted during the entire period that they were building the Qaraween. That Imam Zayd recently, that during this whole time when they were fundraising to buy this place at Zaytun, he was fasting the whole time. Right? These are the way things start. Is like this, and the point here though is that unfortunately that during the colonial period is that a lot of our awqaf were completely destroyed, and that with the modern economic system, inflation, and this crazy economic system, it's very difficult to get the awqaf back, and that we don't have government patronage as well. And now even overseas is that people would rather support a chair at Georgetown than support a traditional institution. And then on top of that, there's a lot of others that post 9/11 are scared to even give money to the United States because their assets might be frozen and all their other accounts worldwide. So we're in a state, but to me, that there's people that will and I don't say this facetiously. There's people that will give a few dollars to a project like this, that the whole barakah of the project might be in those $2. And that one time a man brought a plate of gold and a plate of dates in front of the Prophet ﷺ. And that the Prophet didn't know which ones were weightier in the sight of Allah Ta'ala. Right? Because it might be that small contribution someone makes, that there's barakah and khair in that, and it lead to great good. Anyhow, that these things are very, very frustrating, and it puts scholars in a very difficult position because no one likes to ask for money. But these are things that people should realize their importance and rally the troops and rally the communities. And you can just imagine how many people are going to benefit from these projects. Anyhow, that secondly, I would take a class online. And then thirdly, I would travel and visit people of knowledge as much as I can. If you know there's people in the area that are teaching or that can teach, go visit them. Go learn from them. Knock on their door. The nature of a traditional scholar is that they're not going to come to your mosque and say, I'm teaching here, come learn from me. Because that's not the nature of the people of Allah Ta'ala. It's that they usually only teach when that they're asked to teach. And so you'd be surprised, within this area, within an hour and a half drive, there's probably close to 2 million Muslims, or at least 1 million plus Muslims. Right? There's a lot of people here, and even locally, that go to them, make them, right, and quote them to the hadith of the Prophet that scholars, when they're asked about something, when they hold back their knowledge, that they'll be bridled with a bridle of fire. You don't necessarily have to quote that hadith to them. I would say, you have to teach me, and remind them of the fact that their teachers taught them. They will teach you, and that especially if you're serious. And then I would have books that. The fourth thing is I'd have books that I read on my own, especially books of the heart. I'd have a book next to my nightstand, and I would, in general, make my whole day a means of learning. So I would read like Risalat, a translation if someone can't access the Arabic after Fajr. I would have a book that as soon as I get into my car, that I just read a couple lines from. I would just have it. So you make your whole life a learning experience. And then one of the greatest ways to answer your question directly is that I would read biographies of the great ulama and awliya, and that will be as if someone is sitting with them. And then finally, a lot of salawat upon the Prophet ﷺ. Salawat upon the Prophet ﷺ is a shaykh for those who don't have a shaykh. That the same thing that you get when you sit before a shaykh, and the tarbiyah, and the purity of heart, and the transformation, if you say a lot of salawat upon the Prophet ﷺ, you will have the same effect upon you. You will have the same effect upon you. Alaykum as-salam. We spoke about literal and metaphorical interpretation of hadith. How should one interpret the hadith which says the murderer and the murdered will both be in the fire, in the hellfire? Perhaps that he's referring to the hadith of Rasulullah, إِذَا إِلْتَقَى الْمُسْلِمَانِ بِسَيْفَيْهِمَا فَالْقَاتِلُ وَالْمَقْتُولُ فِي النَّارِ. And that the companion said, okay, we understand. I said, فَمَا بَعْدَ الْمَقْتُولِ يَا Rasulullah. And that we understand, that the one who murdered, what about the one who's been murdered? And this is mentioned in the chapter of Niyyah in Risalat Salihin, Nawawi. And then the Prophet said, إِنَّ كَانَ حَرِيص عَلَى قَتْلِ صَاحِبِهِ, that he was, eager to kill this other person. And so that the qatil and the maqtul, both being in the fire, if they're fighting for an unjust reason, and that it doesn't appear that there's a literal, there's a metaphorical interpretation of this hadith. And I think we've mentioned before in this class that based upon the verse of Allah Ta'ala, وَمَنْ قَتَلَ مُؤْمِنًا مُتَعَمِّدًا, whoever kills a believer intentionally, فَجَزَاؤُهُ جَهَنَّمْ, his reward will be Jahannam, خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا, eternally in it. Right? And that the majority of scholars, obviously, that don't say that killing another Muslim is kufr, it takes you outside of the fold of Islam, that leads to khulud, eternality in the fire. But the fact that there's even a difference in opinion shows that the seriousness of spilling anyone's blood, especially the blood of a believer. Is trying to perfect and beautify the recitation of Quran in order that it sounds better in the ears of the listeners, a sign of ujub and riyah. If the Prophet said, "Hassinu aswatuhum bil Quran," beautify your voices with the Quran, and that meaning is it recite the Quran beautifully. مَنْ لَمْ يَتَهَنَّ الْقُرْآنَ فَلَيْسَ مِنَّا. Whoever doesn't recite the Quran beautifully is not from us. Now people have different capacities. Right? Not everyone can recite even if they've studied for 20 years like Maulana, mashallah. Why do you think I came all the way from Valentine and spend Ramadan here with you? Not everyone can recite like Maulana. And it's one thing is to recite with a good heart and a good recitation, which is the best of all. And but we should do our best to learn proper tajweed, to learn how to pronounce the Quran properly, and to beautify our voices, and that's a good thing. But you don't have to include it in doing other people. You do it for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. You don't do it for the listeners of the people. And you do that because Allah Ta'ala has told you to do that on the tongue of our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And such that where people are there or not, you still recite beautifully, because you realize that your Lord sees you. And that it's out of adab with the Quran that you recite it beautifully. So you just eliminate the people in the issue, in that, and you do it solely for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. And then that if the sign of it being truthful is that you beautify that, you beautify your recitation even when you're alone, and not bringing to heart that you're doing this for people and others. And then recognize as well that the whole point is that we beautify the Quran in terms of our recitation and recite with tajweed, is so that it makes it easy, it has a greater impact upon the heart, and we can think and we can reflect upon the meanings more. That's the whole purpose of that, not just for its own sake. It's to increase the impact of the effects of the Quran upon the heart, and that to help us ponder it and reflect upon it. And the same thing goes with your clothes. And Allah is beautiful, loves beauty. And if someone chooses to wear nice clothes, and one of my teachers asked our main teacher about this, is that if someone wears clothes that, for instance, in our society to look nice, so that someone gives a good, that someone shows others that Muslims dress well and that type of thing, and that we're clean, and that my teacher responded by saying that still there's iltifat, you're turning towards people, that wear your nice clothes if you're going to wear nice clothes solely for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, because you're adorning yourself for Allah, and Allah that loves to see the traces of His blessing upon His servants. As for the blessing of your Lord, proclaim it. And so make that intention, just divorce people completely from it. Do it solely for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, and that is the safest of intentions. Is it technically haram to adorn your recitation so that others, you want to give them an opportunity to reflect better? That it only becomes haram if you're adorning your recitation because you want them to praise you or think highly of you. Right? If you're doing it not for that reason, because you want to assist them, that it didn't seem like it would reach the level of impermissibility, but still the safer and higher is to do it solely for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, and to divorce people completely from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Knows best. Some questions here?
In several examples, in the answering of your question, you mentioned like wearing nice clothes or beautify your recitation, yet that you separate the people and you do it solely for the sake of Allah. How, and you can extrapolate it in many examples. Things we do that improve sincerity. How do we develop that? Cultivate that.
So the question is how do we cultivate the likes of the things that we just mentioned about wearing clothes only for the sake of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala and so forth? The first step is awareness, right? Learning. Now we just heard the ilm, the knowledge of that, and this is what I've heard directly from my teacher. So that's the knowledge. The first thing is awareness, that we're aware of. Okay, that's something we should aspire to. And then this, like anything else, is that we make an intention right now to act upon it. That I want to make that a part of my life. That's the second step. The third step is, which each step leads to the step that comes after it, is it's a process of mujahada, spiritual struggle. Is that after making that intention, that we strive every time we wear our clothes. We strive that every time we do things for our spouse, or our spouse just does things for us, is that we do it, we consciously bring an intention to heart that we're doing this solely for the sake of Allah. And then if one does that enough, is that through that process of mujahidah, that virtue will become inculcated in it. And like all these things, there's no other way to do it. And then you could add a fourth element there, is that in special times like in Ramadan, that by being in special gatherings, by worshiping Allah Ta'ala, by praying Taraweeh, by doing good things, by that oftentimes you're clothed with virtues just by being around good people in that way. But you could also add another element, which is where you turn to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala and ask Him to assist you in that virtue and so forth. And if you do all of those things, and we're consistent in them, and that the more virtue we come to find out, the more seriously we take it, is that our whole life, over 5, 10, 15, 20 years, will be that cultivating virtue within ourselves. Which this is the whole point, is that this is what life's all about. This is what should preoccupy our day, every single day of our lives. From morning to evening, how can we inculcate virtue in ourselves? That we should be reminding ourselves of these meanings every single day. And we should have societies where that every day after Asr, we have a lesson. This is not something that we just do. No, this should happen. And there's societies that are like this still, where there's just a regular inundation of knowledge. And then this will cultivate that within us, inshallah.
In the last 10 days of Ramadan, it's my desire to be here. However, common in our culture is to be invited to other people's homes, and it's their right, technically, to accept their invitations.
Yeah.
What's this one do?
So the question is that we would rather be making i'tikaf in the last 10 days, but we get invited to people's homes, so what do we do? That's a very hard one, and I just suffered from that last night on the 21st night myself. My intention was to be in i'tikaf as well, and now they got me going up to New York and other places. That's obviously honored to be traveling. Ya Latif, at least make the intention so you get the reward through intention. But if you can arrange your affairs such that your family will be understanding or so forth, or then, without doubt, it's better to, prepare ahead of time and preempt it, so that you kind of get the word out from before Ramadan that you're going to be making i'tikaf and that type of thing. And maybe you can just find neat ways of like calling relatives and like, oh, I'm going to make i'tikaf for the last 10 days. You all want to join me? So that they know already that you intend to do that. But in the event that that you have family members who really want you somewhere, that type of thing, then do the best you can and know that family is a priority and that your Lord is merciful. If you make the intention to have been there, that you'll get the reward for being here and doing good to your family as well. So try a little bit of both. But that's from Iman to have your heart attached to that. Okay, then just one more question here we'll take care. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. What is meant by for the sake of Allah? Rather more specifically, that we hear often as solely for the sake of Allah. That's not a basic question. That is a very, very important question. And it's at the essence of our entire deen, because Allah Ta'ala says, وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. They have not been commanded except to worship Allah, being sincere into Him in religion. What we mean by when we say solely for the sake of Allah is that we mean by that ikhlas, sincerity. In other words, solely for the sake of Allah is that you say what you're going to say, you do what you're going to do, and your only intention in that thing is to draw near to Allah. And the meaning of drawing near to Allah is that one, be aware at a heart level that Allah Ta'ala is close to them. In other words, is that one, be in a state where of dhikr and remembrance, where they find intimacy in the meanings of that remembrance. So that's essentially what means sincerity. And then in particular, what sincerity means is that we only desire that we draw near to Allah Ta'ala in everything that we do. Allah is best. الفاتحة. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah bless us in these last 10 days. These Qawatim Mubarakah, inshallah, all the blessed gatherings that are taking place in the last 10 days. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us and receive. And of course, in these gatherings, we Allah ta'ala attach our